Oh, hi. Sorry, I was just catching up on watching my favorite PBS shows. You know, today you can watch TV just about anywhere, but 50 years ago, in 1964, when KIXE first got started, it wasn't like that. Back then, you had the major networks, you know, CBS, NBC, ABC, and if you weren't home to watch a TV show, forget about it. VCRs weren't even invented yet, let alone DVDs and stuff like this. It was only science fiction back then. Well, the landscape has changed a lot. And at that time, in 1964, a group of concerned North State residents got together with the goal of forming an educational television station. I'm Jim Bramer, and for the next hour, I'll be your guide as we take a look back at the first 50 years of KIXE, starting with its founding way back in 1964.
What had happened is that in 1952, the governors were all notified that these channels were going to be allocated for educational use. And I think Earl Warren was the governor at the time. I'm not sure, but I believe so. And he called the county superintendents together and said, you better get together as groups and form corporations so that if a channel becomes available, you can receive it. You had to be a corporation to receive a channel. And so the 9 Northern County, Lucy Hunt got the 9 Northern County superintendents together. She was the superintendent of Shasta County at the time. And as I understood it, she was the force that got them together and said, this is what we need to do.
In those days, there were only 2 commercial stations in the Reading-Chico area. A KRCR, I believe, in Reading, and KHSL in Chico. And these commercial stations certainly had an interest because the third commercial reservation in the Reading-Chico area was Channel 9. And the original educational television allocation was a VHF or UHF channel. And back in the 60s, you know, most people couldn't even get the UHF on their television set. So it was really advantageous to the people of the Reading-Chico area that the commercial stations were interested in educational television taking up that final VHF assignment.
We had to go before the FCC. We were one of 3 areas in the United States that were subject to a comparative hearing before the FCC, which doesn't make any sense to anybody but me, perhaps. But the comparative hearing was to determine whether this Channel 9 would better serve the commercial community or the educational community. And obviously, we got the channel.
First introduction to KIXE was in 1964, as a matter of fact. I was working in KPBS in San Diego, and we were putting California Public Television stations on the air, and we all went on at about the same time. And the little tiny station up in Reading went on. It was the smallest station at the time in the state.
It didn't become a PBS station until 1969. But in 1967, President Johnson signed the PBS, the Broadcasting Act.
He had proposed that the airwaves belong to the people, a proposal that now becomes law, with President Johnson's signature on the Public Broadcasting Act. The act establishes a new institution that will assist stations and producers who aim for the best in broadcasting, who seek, through television, to enlighten their audience.
So then we were already a non-commercial educational channel when PBS was actually born. And so we've been with them ever since. When I started my internship through Chico State was 1979, and we were located at called the Meat Locker, and it was a building at 825 Industrial Street. We acquired, through grants and stuff, we acquired a van. And that was our production van. But it was also a place not where we could go out on shoots and to different things like we did later on, like we did the air shows, but what we, it allowed us to have an editing bay or out in the van. So We didn't have any room left in the studio anymore, so we used that as an office for editing our productions. And then, of course, when we did live productions, like an auction or whatever, then that was used. And we had cables run in from the building, from the main building into the van. And of course, wherever we left, we disconnect, of course, and go out into the community and shoot or videotape different events, or if it was the parades. One year we did the rodeo, over here, the Reading Rodeo. We were doing a lot of things. And of course, it wasn't just the staff, it was volunteers.
I remember absolutely working over, I was in my early 20s, and we were kind of tag team editing in the van in the parking lot. And I had to have those gloves that have cutouts for the fingers so you could edit. And you couldn't really reach all the equipment, because when you were going to do like superimpositions or dissolves, you had to have all these machines running. You had to have them all lined up. It wasn't electronically set up in those days, digitally set up. So you had to start this button and then fade it from black, and you had to hit the audio booth, and then there was another machine you wanted to start, and so you had a little mirror, and you had to reach up so you could see the mirror and where to touch it. So you couldn't quite reach everything in this van, and you'd be standing there doing gymnastics trying to edit this. And then when you were in there about 8 or 10 hours, somebody else would come and take over, and they were there 8 or 10 hours. It kind of smelled like a gym in there.
Had some issues back then, had some financial issues, and had some equipment needs that needed to be met. And I was excited because it was my first GM job, and I was very optimistic about the future for the station, not really knowing the issues that the station actually faced at the time, thinking that anything was possible. And with that attitude, we really did turn it around and got the finances in order and got some federal grants for equipment and started doing local production.
I used to direct a lot of music shows there, and at the old building, if you had a 5-piece band, you really couldn't see the 5th person in one shot unless you kind of shot from the side and lined them up just so. And in this studio, you could actually see the whole band that was on the stage. I mean, that's a big difference. It was much smaller, much smaller. And we used to do some amazing things with a small studio. But this was just incredible to move into this beautiful space.
We needed to move into a bigger facility. So there was a search for a building or some land that we could be able to expand into. And so the community was supporting us, but we needed to be in bigger quarters. So we found it was a piece of property here on North Market Street, 603 North Market Street, and it was a building that had to be remodeled, and so that was done, and we achieved. It was called the Miracle on North Market Street when it was completed, and it was 1987 when we moved in. It happened in 2 stages. We moved our offices. My memory is correctly, we moved our offices in '86, towards the end of '86, and then it was in '87 that we eventually moved our master control over. And we did that. Back then we weren't 24 hours, 7 days a week. So we did it overnight. We took all of our equipment and moved it into in the off hours and moved into master control.
When I first came to KIXE, we had just come into this building. As a matter of fact, my first day at work was 2 days before the grand opening of the Miracle on North Market Street. We inherited or purchased this building. This building was about 10, 15 years old when we bought it. It had been a former service station, and it had also been a carpet store along with, I believe, a used clothing store. So we converted the building, added the storage room that is just behind the studio, and had to rebuild it. One of the challenging things about the station was to try and get the floor in the studio low enough and the grid high enough to be able to use it as a television studio. It was an exciting time hanging the pictures on the wall and painting the walls to welcome the people to KIXE. On our opening day, we had a gigantic balloon arch over the door, which we released. And in that balloon art, just as an aside, we had put several notes in some of the balloons. And many months later, we got a call from Utah that found one of our KIXE balloons, and they had called the station to say that they had found it. So we know that winds work.
A television station is only as good as its programming, and KIXE has a long history of providing not only great shows through their partnership with PBS, but also producing some great programs right here in the studio.
Hi, I'm Steve Ramel. Welcome to this special edition of Jobs.
It's time for Challenge of the Minds 1996.
Stage 9, videotaped at the Attic in Northern California, the showcase for the finest in traditional and contemporary music from around the globe.
Local programming has always been the mainstay of public television. It's why public television exists, as a matter of fact. When public television first started back in the early 60s, and actually PBS came into existence in 1968, realized that it was the forerunner for what today is Nickelodeon. It was the predecessor to the do-it-yourself channel, to the Home and Garden Network, to the news channels. All those programs started on public television. So local programming has always been extremely important.
Shasta County Schools had been given an hour on Saturdays to do some sort of educational programming. And a gentleman named Al Weisberg was very, very interested in this kind of programming. And I hosted some school shows for him. He brought in a different school each Saturday, work from a different school each Saturday, and broadcast for an hour. And I hosted those shows for him. So that gave me a little bit of background, little bit of experience that helped me a lot, and Al worked very hard to have this channel go forward.
So
He should be remembered for all the work that he did to kind of spearhead this sort of programming for the northern counties.
KIXE had a number of people that would host our local programs. Some of them were on staff, and many of them were just volunteers in the community. Bill Wagner, who was the former editor of the Record Searchlight, hosted our own online program. John Crancer, for many years, did a magazine-type show, here a forerunner actually to California's Gold at KIXE, and he's now in Idaho producing programs. Lorraine Decter is a mainstay in Northern California as far as public radio and public television hosting is concerned. Local radio talent hosted many of our programs. Probably the most known person outside of Lorraine that hosted programs is a local fellow named Jim Bremer. And Jim Bremer grew up at KIXE from a young man to who he is today. And we thank him very much for all the service that he's done for us.
There were so many. They were fabulous productions. Everything from, air shows, the jazz festivals. They went internationally, both of those, and they were really fun. You'd have a crew of like 30, 40 people going out for a 3 or 4 day event and capturing all the footage, and having teams go out, which included staff member, volunteers, family members. It was so wonderful.
We'd take the van out to the air shows, and I believe they were in the summer. Whenever it was hot. It was always very, very warm. I was usually a camera operator at that time, and we'd get one camera on top of the van. We'd also get another camera on top of one of the buildings, or maybe we'd get we just had cameras placed all over the place, and then we had people on field deck cameras, and they'd go over to different airplanes. I can remember the Blue Angels. There was a lot of different activity going on because it was an air show. And then we'd come back, we'd record for a couple days, then I think it was a half hour, maybe an hour program, highlighting what occurred at that air show. First
Air show I volunteered at, when the credits rolled, after it was edited and everything, it said Assistant Director Lorraine Decter. And I'm like, I thought I was the crazy person at the airport who was standing with their headsets out in the heat, telling them the Blue Angels are like 3 o'clock from Mount Shasta, and I was the crazy person out there in the heat telling them where all the planes were.
Hi, I'm John Crancer, and welcome to Faces and Places. Our first stop tonight and the location for our show is Upper Bidwell Park.
You know, it's hard to believe it's been almost 30 years since I first began work on the KIXE's local program, Faces and Places. And as you can tell from the title, it was a local magazine show about the people and locations in Northern California, from Chico on the south to Susanville on the east, Weaverville on the west, all the way up to Wairika. It just was a great area to work in. It's just a fantastic area. And we would do about 13 segments a year. I think I worked about a half dozen years on it, and do everything from scenery to geology to history. Of course, the people that made everything go. And really, the people were very unique in that area, as well as the whole region itself. It's just a great area. Some of my favorite segments that I can remember were a 100-mile cattle drive near the Nevada border. There was a geologic expedition in the Medicine Lake area where they have the obsidian and the quartz, a horsepacking trip in the Trinity Alps, kind of an exploration of the Mount Shasta area. That is an incredible mountain. Oh, and the Society for Creative Anachronisms gathering in Bidwell Park. The nice thing about the program was I wasn't the only producer doing segments. We often had other producers that were on staff do segments for the program, and even folks from the community would come in and help, sometimes volunteer, sometimes paid. So we had a whole group of people that contributed to the program to kind of make it what it was. It was just a collection of stories about everything that made Northern California what it is.
Tom Paxton on Stage 9.
Here's to you, my rambling boy. May all your rambling bring you joy. Help me sing it now.
The Stage 9 show is one of the shows I started producing when I first came as a volunteer, and then eventually became producer director of that show, and it went national for several years. 3 years, it was a national distribution to about a third of the PBS stations in the nation, which was particularly great because local groups who were really good got to come here and be videotaped and sent out to the nation, but other performers that would come through on Interstate 5, you know, we'd catch them as they went through town and say, we know you're coming, we have a hotel room and a piano, stop on by, and we do these fabulous shows here. The audiences loved it, the volunteers loved it, crew members. It was a great community event that really showed what we had here in Northern California to a bigger audience. Tom Paxton, Holly Neer and Ronnie Gilbert, who used to be with the Weavers. She was with the Weavers. That was really fun. We had, people who were great in old-timey music, Greg Brown, Marley's Ghost. Some of those groups, Women in Song and Marley's Ghost, were not the most well-known acts we had, but they were the most loved by people all through the nation that we heard more and more people comment on. And some of those people, like Women in Song, were on Vashon Island, which is a little island in the Pacific Northwest, and they stopped here on a rainy day, came in and sang in the studio and sang songs here for everybody in the station. Said, we want to do an audition, and just started singing out in the hallway. They were hilarious. They ended up getting a slot on the show. So it wasn't always the famous people, but it was these very small niches of folk music, like the best Scottish fiddler in the entire world, you know, Alistair Fraser, or the best Paraguayan harpist in the entire world. Very small niches of folk music, but the absolute experts were here in this studio in these performances.
So grab some paper, get ready, it's almost time. Mark will show you how to get on the paper what's in your mind. A rocket ship, a pair of shoes, a shooting star, and some kangaroos on the imagination station. On the imagination station.
We also produced a national show at one point called Mark Kistler's Imagination Station. Mark Kistler, who had produced the show for years, came to us and asked if we could give him a good price on producing the show for national distribution, which we did. And in fact, we went through a grueling week of producing 26 shows. That, if you do the math on that, you would see that we produced anywhere from 5 to 6 shows a day. These are half-hour shows. And I was a little nervous, in fact, at times, whether our creaky old equipment at little old KIXE in Reading would be able to hold up under such demands for national production. And at the end of the day, we got through it, and in fact, the show went national and aired for several years across the country on public television. So we were very proud of that, and in fact, a lot of us added that to our resume as something that was a feather in our cap.
One was called North State Quilts, and this is one that Kitty Connors produced. And she was our special events and volunteer coordinator back at the station back then. And so she produced about, I think it was 4 or 5 of them, but the quilters of the North State would just make these elaborate quilts.
Quilters make the world go round. I learned that in all these small communities in rural Northern California, if you want to get anything done, you actually work with the quilters, because they are in every walk of life, and they're related to the people in politics and in the arts and in education. Everybody is involved through quilting, and that's where mostly women will sit down and stitch and talk about community and have community dialogue, and it's a fascinating place. And they, I found, were excellent supporters of public television, so we had a real symbiotic relationship with the quilters in Northern California. The one after 9/11 was the most incredible one. We had Candace Lavosi come in and put together music for each piece. So she took the video of the quilts that were done and actually composed for each piece. It was very minimalist in nature, not explaining too much about the pieces, but letting the pieces describe themselves. And I think that was one of the things we learned over the years that made our art auction video catalog so good, our quilt shows and things like that, is we really learned how to incorporate the audio and the video in a really nice way and kind of get out of the way sometimes and let the pictures tell the story and the music drive the show.
Another program that I worked on while I was there, that was my second responsibility, was a program called Challenge of the Minds. Now, what that was, it was basically a high school quiz show. We would bring in teams of high school students, very smart high school students, and we'd do it official. We'd have judges and timers, and I would ask the questions that were provided by an independent supplier. And we'd start with kind of a bracketed group of high school teams. I'm not sure, I don't remember whether it was, I think 16 possibly, and we'd work our way on a weekly basis, work our way down to the finals between 2 teams, and then declare a winner. So every year we would have a number of programs working our way up to the final Challenge of the Minds winner. So yes, I was a game show host for part of my time there in Redding, California.
If you didn't have local programming, you would be just like the PBS national feed. And that's a fabulous thing, and that's why a lot of us turn to public television stations, because we love the programs on the national feed. But people don't realize how much, even the programming on our public television station here at KIXE is a patchwork. It's not just from PBS. It's from a whole array of program sources. And when you have people producing here out of the studio, or even just in the area where people are bringing in their projects that they've produced at their school or on their sabbatical, or their 5-year project, they've spent their 20 years of their life researching. All of a sudden, maybe we can get a grant here, and maybe we can just provide a little bit of infrastructure support, and that subject matter that's been studied for 20 years and collected can now be shown to a whole lot of people. It's going to make a difference in the long run in the history of Northern California. I hugely believe that, because this is one of the few places that has captured some of those historical moments on videotape and have it for posterity. If we didn't have that, we would just have the national feed. And who are we? Who are we as people when we look back 10, 15, 25, 50 years? We know who we were 50 years ago because we have something to prove it. We have the video to prove it. We can show the events, the politics, the social structure of the time. If we didn't have that, we wouldn't be able to see that and share it with each other. Educationally, it's huge, and culturally, it's a really big deal.
No show about KIXE would be complete without a mention of the loyal and hardworking volunteers who keep the wheels turning at the station on a daily basis. Volunteers operate the production equipment, they call for auction donations, help out at community events, and perform many of the unseen tasks that make KIXE the vibrant place it is. So join me in saluting our behind-the-scenes heroes.
Tell you, to volunteer at KIXE is probably one of the bigger thrills I've had, being somebody from Reading. I've never done any auctioneering before. The minimal in front of camera work that I've done in my life, this was a situation where I just kind of lucked into it. If you are interested in KIXE, if you are interested in volunteering or doing something for your community, this is a great place to get plugged in. The people that come in down here, that work here, and the individuals that volunteer down here, they're like a family. Once you meet them once, they will not forget your name, they won't forget your face. They're the types of people that once you get plugged in, you're plugged in for life. And coming down here it's such a thrill. It's less of volunteering and less work and much more fun and hanging out with people that are familiar to you, meeting new people, having a good time, and learning new skill sets. If you're interested in work in front of the camera or behind the camera or in front of the scenes or behind the scenes or with production or set making, this would be a place to get plugged in, and it's not hard. Come down and talk to the staff down here and find out what it takes to get plugged in. Because once you're plugged in, you're plugged in. You don't have to worry about not being called back. If you come down and show some enthusiasm and passion go much further than ability and talent. Ability and talent can be taught, but the enthusiasm and the passion to be a part of PBS can't be taught. That's something you just got to have.
I grew up on PBS. I grew up watching the shows Sesame Street, Mr. Rogers, and for me, KIXE has been completely an enriching experience and part of my own development, and it has been a real honor to be able to get to know the staff here, to get to do the programming here, and I look forward to continuing my work.
You know, some of the people who volunteered at KIXE became my best friends, and of course, I started as a volunteer at KIXE. That's how we all start here, pretty much. And it becomes such a camaraderie and such a nice fusion of creative energy and spirit that you end up working together in really positive ways, and hopefully start working on projects and maybe find some funding for a project so some people maybe can get paid a little bit. And the volunteers in this area are so skilled. We have excellent writers, we have excellent set designers, we have excellent, talented people who are living in a very small rural community. I think they need the outlet as much as we need their support. It's a nice symbiotic relationship, and the volunteers make the world go round. We couldn't have done what we did and do the national programs that we did as local programs without the volunteers. When we put a crew of 30 or 40 people out to cover a jazz festival or an air show, we wouldn't have been able to hire a crew of 30 or 40 people. It was only because we had volunteers that we could trust, that could run cameras, that could do sound, that could do the lights, all the different crazy things.
The funny part about coming to KIXE to volunteer is you run into people you haven't seen forever. I mean, there's a gentleman here at KIXE I've known since I was a very young child. There's a gentleman that works down here that volunteers here that I've known for years through an Aikido class. You kind of get plugged back into the community to people that you haven't seen in a long time. I think one of my favorite memories is actually the last auction that we did. The whole staff that works for me at my salon was here, and when the camera wasn't on them and I was on TV, the girls were in the background answering phones and making faces and trying to get me to stutter, and they managed a couple of times, but I recovered easily. It's a fun time, and it's a place where I don't just get to come down and volunteer, but I get to bring my daughter with me, and she comes down and volunteers, which is kind of cool because now it's become a family thing to be here.
We just did what needed to be done. We weren't doing it because needed the title or we needed any of those things. It was really fun, collaborative work to make television together. And if we didn't have this resource here in Northern California, our young people, our kids, our families wouldn't be learning these skills as well. And I think it's pretty critical.
Being a part of the auction has helped me in my daily business of communicating with clientele and people on the outside of PBS and outside of my salon. As a young man, PBS influenced me because I did watch shows. I grew up on shows like 3-2-1 Contact and The Electric Company and Sesame Street.
We had a group of ladies that would come in every Tuesday that named themselves the KIXE Chicks. And as the general manager, it was always difficult for me to introduce them because I didn't want to be chauvinistic, but that was really the term that they wanted to use themselves. And they had t-shirts and mugs, and they would throw parties in here, and the KIXE Chicks were a very important part of the station.
You know, back in the day when we were having 10 nights in a row, we had up to $365,000 that we were auctioning off here in the North State. And we would come in, dedicated volunteers, every single night of the auction, sometimes for 4, 5, 6 hours an evening until that very last item was sold. And it was because of that dedication of the community donating, the cameramen coming in and standing on their feet for that long. When you think about that perspective, we turn on our televisions at home and we sit back and we enjoy watching, you know, your favorite rug come across, or a couch, or a vacation trip to the Galapagos Islands. That was one of my favorites that we sold. But you think of the people behind the scenes that really, really make that happen. The businesses that are feeding all the volunteers, the volunteers that are answering the telephone, that are getting the items, donating, writing the scripts. I can tell you I've probably stayed here hundreds of hours writing scripts. When you think about what it takes to actually describe every single item that you have for the auction, and the time and the talent that it takes to, you might start off a little rough, but by the time you've wrote a script for over 300 items, you actually get pretty good at it. And so that's, I just think a community coming together, you couldn't do it with one person. It's not possible. And that's what's great about public television, is we have a whole community that is so generous, and we're very fortunate.
Channel 9 has always existed on the foundation of its volunteers. Without volunteers, KIXE wouldn't be what it is today. Over the years, we've had thousands and thousands of people that have donated their time, their efforts, and all of their energy to make sure that public television continues. Whether or not they were on the board of directors, whether they were a group of people that would come in on Tuesday to stuff envelopes, whether they were the production crew, or every single job that KIXE has was always driven by volunteers. And without that community support, KIXE wouldn't exist. In fact, it was one of the biggest, probably the proudest items that KIXE had, was that over the years it received many awards from National Public Television for its community outreach and its volunteer efforts.
You know, this studio may seem quiet now, but during one of KIXE's famous auctions, things just go wild. There are volunteers running in front of cameras, setting up items to sell. The phone bank is yelling out bids to the fast-talking auctioneers. Throughout the years, KIXE sold everything from livestock to porta potties and fancy trips in the name of raising money for educational programming.
During an auction, it becomes a three-ring circus, and or maybe a four-ring circus that you only have room for three. And you never know exactly what's going to happen. You try and do as much pre-planning as possible, but as any live television program, once the red light comes on, you're off and running, and you go with what happens. At the end of the evening, you hope it all went well, you hope you weren't too embarrassed, and you hope the tension levels remained pretty calm. We never really had too many problems during auction as far as distemper or people getting angry with each other. It was always pretty a jovial atmosphere. And we always tried to take the attitude that what happens will happen, and let's just go on to the next thing and forget about the past. They're really exciting times, and they're fun. They were fun events.
There is noise everywhere, and you can hardly find a clear path to not get in front of a camera to go walk across the studio to do something. So it is very difficult, especially when you first come into a studio like that. You don't know where you can go. You don't know what you can do until you kind of get the lay of the land and understand the flow of where the cameras are going and where the flow of action is going. That's why you really have to have a good floor director who can keep everything organized on your floor, because it's a madhouse. It's an absolute madhouse. People are having fun. They're screaming and yelling. People are trying to listen to each other. It's like nothing else, I think, in the entire universe, really.
Whether they were at the old meat locker or downtown or here in our own studio, where you get 50 to 100 people involved in one night, and then getting the business community to support us.
Where we were driving down the street and I would see a vendor on the side of the road selling windmills, for example, in this one case, and I thought, they're traveling through, they're selling their windmills, but we're going to get one of those. And so everyone in the van, we went on go-getting trips. We're like, you're not going to get something from someone selling a product on the side of the street. But we not only left with one, we left with two. And yes, it was a very windy day.
The first auction that we had was done down at Chico State. And people were just wonderful. Fellows would be listening to it, and they'd call up with a donation, and they'd say, also, I'm in business and I will donate something. One man kept donating sets of tires, which was just great. He upped the ante about 4 or 5 times that one evening. And it was all volunteer help, and it was fun.
Yeah, it was really an amazing setup. What we did, the studio was at Chico, where we had the auction, Chico State University. And we would open up a telephone line, just a regular telephone line, would call the studio in Chico, and we'd have an open line with a group of operators in Reading at our office there. Plus, we'd have another line in Red Bluff with a group of volunteer operators in Red Bluff. So when we put things on, if the bid came in, you could dial a local number in Chico where we had a bank of operators, a local number in Red Bluff, or a local number in Reading. Plus we had a toll-free number for all the other outlying areas to bid. And so, bids were funneled down to an operator from Reading, from Chico, and then of course, Reading and Red Bluff. And of course, the calls that came in to Chico were the 800 number calls. And so the bids would be transferred from these various places and put on the board. So it was pretty tough. And of course, our first auction was in black and white. And, we didn't have the full power capability.
Now, we had a small studio. We did the auction out of there. The thing that was good about it is the community would come out and help us. The auction there, had been a tradition for many years before I arrived in 1980. And it just involved everybody in the community. And we were in such close quarters in that small studio that everybody got to know everybody. And it was just really a great community. I remember it being a great community event. When I moved here to Charlotte, we had much bigger studios, and we did an auction, which actually started when I got here. One of the reasons they hired me was my auction experience. And but we had a huge studio, and you didn't have the intimacy that you had out there. I couldn't recreate the community experience here that we had in Reading.
I did auctions for 8.5 years, some portion of it. We started out, actually Kitty and I started out working on it together, and it had actually gone away for a little bit. She brought it back and was revamping it, and with her I was able to learn all the different departments. So we started out in traffic, so Mike Lampella, the general manager, and I were the traffic people. So we were in charge behind the scenes, setting up what the boards were going to look like. And that was really my first introduction to auction, was going out into the community, asking for donations, really just trying to understand the partnership between the station and the community members.
Coming into KIXE to do an auction, there's always a big buffet of food, there's people around, there's a lot of energy. We get in early, review our scripts, get to socialize and watch things get set up. We get to witness the displays being put up, which gives us a better idea of the products that we're going to be moving that night. The energy behind the scenes is extremely high. And once we get on camera, that just magnifies by about 1,000. Everybody's running around. There's a lot of busy work going on, a lot of laughing behind the scenes, a lot of people just, it's less work and more of like a giant friendly group of people having a good time and hanging out and doing something more than just for themselves but for the community and having a good time doing it.
We are back on the quickie board, and this is again where things go fast and they go furious and they are fun.
You're doing the quickie board and it's going really fast. You can hardly get your breath. You've got to talk so fast and pitch this so fast and furiously. So it's pretty intense, especially when you only have about 5-7 minutes off, and then you have to have studied up all your new pieces and turn around and do it again. It goes pretty quickly. But then when you have something like an art auction, you actually get to take your time, and that's when it becomes a harder thing to do, because you may have a $500 piece of work or a $700 or $800 piece of work, $1,000 piece of work, and in 3 or 4 minutes you've got to help create a connection with the viewer to this piece of art. And make them want it in their home enough to call you up and bid that money. So you're really learning how to talk directly to people and figure out how to ask them to think about something. And you're not just, you're thinking about the piece of art, but you're thinking about this other thing, which is how important is it to support public television?
We've had bands come through, whether it be Enterprise High School or Shasta Wolfpack Band. We've had different kinds of talent come in here to demonstrate some of the products that were sold. I remember a belly dancer one time came in, and we sort of had to take the cameras and put them somewhere else because it was a little more risque than what we wanted at the time. But we had squirt guns, we've had clowns, we've had just about everything to come through the KIXE auctions that became really the community program.
Those fundraisers are just a blast. But you know what? Throughout the years, KIXE has taken upon themselves to spread the wealth by giving back to the North State and promoting education and literacy far beyond the TV screen.
For many years, KIXE had the philosophy that it needed to be a part of the greater community. And the greater community was more than Reading. More than just being a member of the Chamber of Commerce or a local service club or member of a school board. It was always important that the staff of KIXE involved themselves in the community so that the community would know that KIXE was a vital part of their individual towns. So we would go to parades, we would attend many events, we had a lot of outreach activities in both the northern part and the southern part of the coverage area, so that whether it be through literature, whether it be through reading, whether it was in drug prevention, or whatever community activity or what was important to the town at that time was important to KIXE. We always took the approach that it wasn't Reading's public television station, it was Northern California's public television station, and that was the community that we tried to serve.
We talk about outreach and all the different opportunities that we've had. I had some really great times with Kitty Connors, the volunteer coordinator, who was here probably about 10 years ago with me. We had an opportunity to be in a parade in Cottonwood, and while we were in that parade, Kitty and I, oftentimes I would be in the character and she would be the person making sure that the character was taken care of. And one day we had this bright idea to, why do we have this rule to stay in the truck? That just doesn't make any sense. When we've got all these kids on the sidelines, they're all cheering for us and they all want to see you in the character. So we had this bright idea that I would walk alongside the truck. Well, that walk quickly became a gallop and then a full-fledged sprint, because we realized that when the little ones saw the character, they didn't just want to wave, they actually wanted to touch and feel. And when I turned around and I had literally probably 50 kids just running after me down the street in the parade, and it was all I could do just to run alongside the truck to try to get back in. And that's when we realized rules are important and you cannot run quickly in a character costume.
In regards to outreach, we had the was called Ready to Learn, And of course, we received grants from the federal government. We also received some grants from the state and local entities so that we could go out to preschoolers, to elementary schools, to libraries.
Big Bird has come to our library, and he's a great, popular guy. He's kind of tall, but he is really popular, and Cookie Monster has come to the library also, and the kids just love the characters. As youth services manager, I've been in charge of a lot of the children's programming, and KIXE has been a really important partner with us in several events. One annual event that we do have is the Happy Seuss Day to You, which celebrates Dr. Seuss's birthday on March 1st. And KIXE has been a great resource for bringing the Cat in the Hat into the program and providing us with books and other materials. Because our children do watch your educational programming, PBS programming, I think it's really important to have that local element because it brings it home to them. It brings local members of the community in on things. We're able to partner with Channel 9 in different local events, which is really important.
It's amazing now, you know, before we used to have to work so hard for publicity, and you'd almost have to take a picture of a kid with Big Bird and send it to them later, you know, to get this. But now you walk down the streets of downtown Chico with Big Bird like we did during the Snow Goose Festival, and everybody's taking their own pictures and sharing them on Facebook and sending them out through Twitter, and all of a sudden people are really aware in an instant. In 10 minutes, in a day, you can accomplish so much more than you used to be able to just by being in that community with your characters or, you know, with an event that's coming. That information goes out really quickly now.
I, as you could say, inherited a relationship with KIXE, which I'm really happy about. When I started my position at Turtle Bay Exploration Park as the educator, we have a long history of working with KIXE, and we mutually support each other throughout many programs throughout the year. We work very closely together and are going to continue to do so. This last year, we partnered on the Week of the Young Child, which is an annual week that is filled with educational activities for children, and one day is hosted at Turtle Bay, and KIXE always comes and faithfully and brings a booth and sets up information there. We collaborated this year also on a project for one of our Science Saturdays called Mini Skyscrapers, and that was definitely a collaboration because it was in partnership with you guys, with KIXE, who put on the Super Skyscrapers series, and it worked beautifully. KIXE and Turtle Bay Exploration Park are a perfect fit to work together because we're both nonprofits. We're both trying to do good things for the community, and we are both looking for support for the community. So rather than working separately, we're much stronger together.
You know, when you think about public television and you think of KIXE and you think of kids programming, you automatically, I do, go to Sesame Street. And over the last several years, I've been raising my children with PBS, and we had Barney the dinosaur, we had Teletubbies, we still have Sesame Street, we now have Word Girl, and just great quality public television programming for kids. And you know, the kids that are watching now, the children that are tuning in now, they're going to be our future. And I'm just so excited to be able to work for an organization that's able to sow back into the community core values and strengths, talking about basic reading, writing, and arithmetic. And our kids are really the future of public television.
You know, when you have a really good, thriving organization like a public television station like this in small rural areas, everybody can get behind it and support it and be served by it. You know, when you don't have a station in your community and you're picking up something from another city somewhere or farther away, or a big city when you're a small place, it's not the same. You don't feel as connected. Your kids aren't going there supporting it as much. It's not, you're not seeing the streets that you walk on your television station. So there's a big difference when your community's involved in it.
Today, KIXE is stronger than ever. Their weekly interview show, The Forum, is getting ready to enter its 4th season. And they also have produced a half-hour documentary on the Pioneer Baby's grave near Old Shasta. Very interesting show. There's also a Christmas special and a salute to our troops. After a brief hiatus, the on-air auctions are back, and they're just as crazy as ever and lots of fun, too. And the staff continues to reach out into the community, donating books to libraries and Head Start facilities, and also serving as media sponsors for many other nonprofit groups.
I think that it serves the community very well. And in spite of, we had been told by a gentleman from RCA who was sent to take a look at the county and the county's, the service area for Channel 9 to see whether they felt that we could support, and he was to report back to the FCC, that whether or not we could support a channel over a period of years. And the answer was no. They didn't think it was possible. And I think Reading and the 9 counties have proved them wrong.
Prior to my arrival, and based on what I was told, there were some real issues about whether the station was going to be able to survive as one of the smaller stations in the system. Now you're coming up on 50 years, and by golly, you've shown everybody that a station like KIXE can serve its community, serve it well, and prove its worth to the community, which you have definitely done with the 50-year anniversary.
I'm wondering now as I talk to you whether if somebody would have said to me, you think Channel 9 will be around in 50 years? I don't know how I would answer that, but I'm so happy you are. Sounds like you're thriving as well.
Justification for KIXE would be a sense of community, a sense of place where people live and what's going on in and around their area, which you don't necessarily get from 200 cable channels. And I think we've all realized over the years that with satellite and cable, and yes, you get 250 channels in your home, but if you ask people, they're probably watching 4 or 5 of those channels on a regular basis. They probably don't even watch the rest of them. And a lot of television is still just a vast wasteland. And public television still shines.
Having a PBS affiliated station in the North State is very important because we're only 1 out of 350 PBS stations in the nation. And I think it's crucial to know that we have people in the North State that they are also learning to be better people, to be educated, to have a broader spectrum of what's happening in the world, and PBS brings that to them, whether it's a nature program or if they were listening to Frontline, what issues are happening around the world and learning aspects of that. It also makes us a family, because if you're a member of PBS, of this local PBS station, you're partnering because you believe in it.
When you watched PBS as much as I did as a child, you wanted to learn, you wanted to grow, and that was one of the most important things about PBS to me. So when I was asked to volunteer, it was an exciting process for me because I grew up watching the channel. I grew up on the educational programs and the art programs and Fluffy Clouds and Happy Trees, and it was wonderful. I mean, they're happy memories. The TV station has happy memories for me.
You know, when people want to learn to make documentaries, they think, I want to do something like on PBS. You know, they're inspired by Ken Burns. They're inspired by maybe somebody locally who produced a documentary about some local subject matter that was done here in Northern California. And because of that, what are they going to do when they grow up? They might do something really magnificent that will actually be something we might even be able to watch from our living room here in rural Northern California.
There is no other entity in the United States like public television. And the more local that television station can be, the more important it will be to everybody's lives. We hear more and more about the advent of cable stations, and we hear about public access cable, and we hear about different forms of communication. But to have a local television station that is answerable to its citizens and to its members is vitally important. You don't have to subscribe to it. You don't have to necessarily pay for it. It's a voluntary organization that's supported by voluntary contributions. But it's that's a terribly important part of that, because you make the choice of whether you want your local public television station or your voice continue to be heard.
Who get a chance to watch this station have a real treasure on their hands that's been here for 50 years and hopefully will be here another 50.